I started wearing a hat like this, 12 or 13 years ago, I guess. But when I started wearing it, I knew the reason I was wearing it. It had a functional purpose. When you have a head like mine, you need a little protection. So my doctor said. But I had no idea when I started wearing this style cap that it would become a part of my identity. As a college president, I walk across our college campus at Point University nearly every day. I meet with people in the community, with donors, with students, and I'm often identified by my hat. In fact, if I failed to show up without this hat, someone would undoubtedly say, "Where's your hat? We know you by your hat." Well, I got to thinking about that, and I realized that leaders are often known by their hats. You've heard many times, just as I have, about the various hats that leaders wear. So I started pondering that and realized maybe I needed to reconsider the hats I wear. And I want to suggest to you as a leader that it's probably time that you consider your selection of leadership hats as well. Well, in order to go on this journey, I decided I really did need to understand a little bit more about hats. So I did some research and found that basically, as smart as they are, the historians and archaeologists aren't really sure when hats were started being worn for the first time, but it seems as if it goes all the way back to the beginning of humankind on our earth. We discovered hats in artifacts, and people wore hats, it seems, for about the same reason people wear hats now. If it's hot outside and the sun is shining, you wear a hat to keep the sun off your skin or your head. If it's cold outside, you put a hat on to make your body and your head warmer. So people have been using hats for functional purposes for a long time. But as I read some of the literature, I also found out that sometimes leaders wore hats as a statement of power or an identification of power. Here's one of the early ancient people hats. If you wore this around, you would get some attention. But wearing a hat for the purpose of demonstrating power is probably not the best style of leadership. I got to thinking about my first hat. What was my first hat? Well, I remembered that when I was 3 or 4 years old, I found one of these. Now, this is a costume version. Mine was a real version. My father served in World War II in the United States Navy, and I found one of his sailor caps. Now, in all honesty, what I tended to do, because I grew up in the era of Gilligan's Island, is I would turn it inside out and wear it like this. You don't have a whole lot of leadership game when you wear your hat like that. So people wear hats for different reasons. I quickly quit doing that, and I began to wear a hat more like this, baseball cap. I wore that hat because I loved baseball. I played it all the time, and so I would often be found in my baseball cap. Baseball caps have become a huge industry, by the way. Everyone has adopted this style of hat. Truckers wear this hat. Golfers wear this hat. Celebrities wear this hat. This hat has all kinds of names, and it's now over $1 billion annual industry. That was interesting to me, and then I started realizing, when I became the interim president, I really didn't understand how many different hats I would wear as an executive leader. And it wasn't long as a president that we had to make some significant changes because our industry was in great flux. Technology had disrupted higher education, much like it's disrupted every industry. There were demands put on price. What's the value of education? There were some that argue and still argue that the reason why you should go to college is to learn a skill and get a job. There's others that think that you go to college to gain knowledge and wisdom and prepare for life. There were all kinds of expectations in the market about what our college should be and how much we should charge and how we would deliver content. And one of the things that we did very early on is we realized we were in the wrong physical location. And so I came to the town where our college resides now, West Point, Georgia, and we held a press conference. At the time, the college's main campus was in East Point, a suburb of metro Atlanta. I came down to this area. There were 100 people at a press conference. And I stood before the microphone and the television cameras and said this: today, Atlanta Christian College is changing her name to Point University. We're also announcing that we're moving our main campus from East Point, Georgia, near Atlanta, to West Point, Georgia, 70 miles south and on the state line. And we're also starting a college football team. That was a big announcement. And I needed another hat really quickly. What I found out that the next segment of my life, I was going to be the chief storyteller, not the chief executive officer. Cat in the Hat tells a pretty good story. That's my representation of a storyteller. But I found out that I needed to tell the Point University story early and often. I needed to tell it to students. I needed to tell it to faculty. I needed to tell it to the community where we were departing, to the community where we were moving, and on I had to tell the story. And I found out the more we told the story, the more the story became real. The more people bought into the vision. But simply renaming a college or university and relocating a college or university was not going to be enough to compete with the demands in our industry. We had to think about a lot of different things. And so I had to make a lot of changes and introduce a lot of changes. So I had to get the hat of a change agent. Now you say, well, that's a construction hat. That's a hard hat. Well, let me tell you, when you make changes, you better have something hard on your head. Because people don't really like change. In one season of my life, I worked as a marriage and family therapist. I have a background in counseling and psychology and marriage and family. And I learned working with families that they would come needing to make a change. And yet, they would resist making that change. And the reason that they would resist, and this is the reason most of us have trouble with change, is that we don't really want to change unless we're convinced that the thing we're changing to is better than the thing we're changing from. And since none of us can see the future, we resist the change because we're not exactly sure how it's going to work out. That's the nature of change. And yet in our industry, we needed to keep up. We needed to keep up with this new phenomenon of online education. And so one of the big changes we've made in recent years is that we've gone fully online with 45 different degree programs that we have built and created just in the last 2 to 3 years. We had to make a change in terms of the kinds of degrees or level of degrees that we were offering. We were offering associate degrees and bachelor degrees, and we had to change and add graduate degrees. We had to think about changes in our price structure. We introduced change in our main campus by introducing a number of sports teams to drive enrollment. It was change after change after change. Our enrollment changed. When we were in East Point, Georgia, we were a little under 400 in student body. This fall, we're over 2,200. That's a lot of change. And then I realized I needed another hat. Now, this doesn't really look like a hat, but it's my coach's hat. You know, I thought about this hat as a coach's hat. There was a famous coach that wore a hat like that, but I went to the other school, the better school, so I didn't want to use that hat. But I was struck by this piece of equipment. If you go to a sporting event, you'll see the coach with one of these. And there'll be a coach up above the field with one of these. And I realized that if we were going to be successful in all of the changes, if we were going to be successful in our storytelling, and by the way, storytelling switched to telling stories about change, I would need to become a coach. Well, coaches are an interesting breed. You see, coaches can set strategy. Coaches can design plays. Coaches can recruit talent. But the one thing the coach can't do is play on the field and win the game. You need a team. And so to keep up with our changing story and to make the changes necessary in our industry, I had to learn how to coach and allow my team to execute on the field. Well, there are a lot of different hats that we could talk about, a lot of different leadership hats that are out there. But I want to tell you about an experience that happened to me about 22 years ago when I was in a different industry. I was working as a consultant, and I had a moment that I think has defined my leadership to this day. As a consultant, I was working with a software company in the electronic commerce space. And that company had recently learned that they were going to be acquired by another company who had recently done an IPO. These two companies were in different states, in the same industry, had been competitors, now were going to be one. And I was asked by the company that was being acquired if I would serve as a consultant representing them and helping the acquiring company integrate this merger. Now, when I was asked that, I literally said, I really don't know how to do that. I've never done anything like that before. But the CEO said, but you know us, and you know our business, and you know our team. And this is their first acquisition. They could use your help. And so off I went to the parent company in Ohio, and I did my work. I spent 3 months or so building an integration plan, figuring out how we were going to do stock options and manage compensation and benefits and how many days off the combined company would have and all of the little details that's involved behind the scenes in a merger. I finished my work, and I was now to meet for the first time with the CEO of the acquiring company. I went into his new office, and I had my work plan. I walked him through what we were going to do. He said, sounds good. I have some questions for you. He asked me some questions about his management team because I'd worked with them. He asked me questions about the new management team that he was acquiring because he didn't know them. And we shook hands, and I turned to leave. I was almost to the door when the CEO said, Dean, now remind me, you're a consultant, right? I said, yes, sir. What are you going to do next? I said, I guess I'm going to do consulting. He said, how would you like to be my new executive and work for me and run human resources, HR, for the combined companies? Well, I was shocked. And I had a moment. And I wondered, what am I going to say? And what I decided to say was just the truth. And here's what I said. Well, sir, my background's in counseling and psychology and therapy. I'm pretty good at the H. I don't have any idea even what the R is. And he said, you're hired. I need someone who understands people. I can pay someone to teach you what you don't know about human resources. Wow, that was a hats off moment. There I was, exposed. I'd been honest. I'd told the truth. I'd shared from my heart what I knew and what I didn't know. I indicated that I'm willing to help, but I have my limitations. And what I discovered was in that moment, that CEO and I had a connection at two levels. We connected at the head, but where we really connected was at the heart. And I realized the power of authentic leadership, hats-off leadership. Leadership that's willing to be honest, to be humble, to admit when they don't know it. Leadership that's willing to be vulnerable. I've tried to practice that style of leadership really every day since. It's not uncommon that I walk across our college campus and a student or a faculty member, a donor, a friend will ask me some particular question about some detail in our catalog or financial aid. And I will gently and jokingly say, you do understand I'm the president, right? And presidents really don't know very much about those kinds of details. I'll help you find someone that can. But what that does, it doesn't turn people off. It draws people in. You see, when you're willing to practice hats-off leadership, you do connect at the head. You then connect at the heart. And your leadership creates a very loyal and interested followership. I think you need to consider your next leadership hat. Maybe it's like mine, hats off.